This is from Christopher on Blue Sky. If Crystal Palace win the FA Cup final today, where would it rank amongst football's greatest underdog stories? I would have put the word England in there, if I'm honest, Christopher, because you've gone quite high with that. But look more, where does it rank?
It's a really, really difficult question to answer on the morning of what could be the greatest day in Crystal Palace's history.
Mean, because I feel like we're going to have to tone it down a touch.
You're going to have to put a bit of sober realism in there because of the way the questions. But I wouldn't be surprised if Christopher's a Brighton fan, to be honest, answering this, knowing what he's doing. But my answer is that it would be a great story. It would be brilliant for Crystal Palace, obviously, be a trophy for them. It would be probably great for the FA Cup as well, I think.
Yeah.
Because for all the chat about how the FA Cup is this and the FA Cup is that, the teams that win it generally are the big teams. You know, you've got a couple of exceptions. You've got Leicester, Portsmouth and Wigan in there. I think across the course this century. So it doesn't happen often that a non-traditional big team wins it. So it would be good. I mean, I think we can establish that it would be an amazing story.
First major trophy for them.
Exactly. But in terms of are Crystal Palace a true definition of an underdog?
No.
Not really.
They're a mid-table Premier League side.
Exactly. And I think there are far bigger stories out there of achievements that have been made by unfancied teams. And I will hand over to Andy. But before I do, a cup competition isn't a league campaign. A cup competition is easier to excel in than a league campaign is, because a league campaign is very difficult to sustain. And the gold standard of that is obviously Leicester winning the Premier League in 2016, and nothing really comes close to that in the modern era in English football.
I'd say in any era.
I just don't know the eras well enough.
I don't need to know them.
Okay, that's fair enough. Just difference between you and me, right? I get the reputation of being arrogant as well. It's weird that.
How's that arrogant? I'm going on vibes.
Okay, fair enough. Well, just say that then.
No, I said on CNN once upon a time, I said this is the greatest achievement in the history of team sport. That's where I put Leicester's title win.
On CNN?
Yeah. Oh, was it fake news to you and your lot, is it?
I'm saying Crystal Palace win the FA Cup is the greatest achievement in history because I'm going on vibes.
Fine. I think, well, Andy, I would say that in terms of greatest underdog stories, Palace are having a decent season, even if they don't win this FA Cup. They're a solid mid-table Premier League side. Then they're looking up the table, and they'll hope to do that next season. I would say Wigan's FA Cup victory is would be a bigger underdog story this century, because they got relegated that season. Yeah. And I think if this was the morning of the would it be the 2003 final between Manchester United and Millwall? That would be up there in the modern era. Manchester United with all those players. Obviously, Millwall lost the game, so it didn't happen. But Millwall in a division below them as well. So Palace are underdogs, but they're playing a side who, yes, of course, Guardiola and everybody not having the best of seasons. So I think a true underdog story is really almost comes from nowhere. I would even say this season in the Premier League, the underdog story would actually be Forest qualifying for Europe, especially if they get Champions League, because no one would have predicted that.
Yeah, and before you come in, the other thing you've got to chuck out there is the idea that actually modern football, almost by design, is making it on purpose harder and harder for there to be an underdog story.
Yeah, and I think that really is the basis of Christopher's question, isn't it? The fact that we see a lot of football, and we've talked about this recently, we see a lot of football where we kind of know who the winner is going to be before the start. So I think this question could only really be asked in the modern era, because if we're going back through the FA Cup, and I think you're right to identify the ones in this century, and they're easier to identify because it's so rare. And this isn't something restricted to England, by the way. I think if you look over Europe, and if you look at all cup winners, they tend to be the biggest team still. If you're looking for cup shocks, you're far more likely these days to find it in the Coupe de France than you are in the FA Cup.
Take Bologna winning the Coppa Italia this week. What is it, their first trophy in
51 years.
51 years. So that's absolutely massive. But in the context, they've been much improved. They've been in the
Champions League this season, and they're better than Milan.
Indeed.
So you're right. And I think this Crystal Palace team is a very, very capable team with a lot of players that a lot of other clubs would want. But I think Christopher's question does lean in to how the FA Cup has really changed in this century, and how cup competitions in Europe really have changed this century, and not for the better, I have to say, in being relatively predictable. It does feel brilliant that Palace are in the final. And I think if you're a Palace fan listening to this and you've just won the FA Cup final, say if you're listening to this on the way home from Wembley, you'll be like, oh, come on.
No, but we're giving them a compliment that we're saying it wouldn't rank because we're saying they're a good side.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but it does kind of. There's two ways of looking at it. You could say it diminishes the achievement by saying it's not a big underdog.
But the word underdog
as well, I think it has to be in the context of this season because normally, as we were saying in the main show yesterday, beating Manchester City is like, oh my God, they're Goliath, they're impossible to beat. But they're not impossible to beat this season. Yeah. So that is different. So the context is everything. If you compared it to, say you're looking at a team that wins multiple titles and imperious. I suppose the obvious one, because you think of, I always think of the 87 and 88 FA Cup finals won by Coventry and Wimbledon. But especially the 88 one, you think Liverpool lost only one game that season. They're absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
And people saw it in a very binary way because Liverpool were so good and because Wimbledon had come from quite modest means. People were saying beforehand, oh yeah, they're gonna beat them 6-0. You know, Wimbledon are going to get absolutely hammered in the final. There was nothing from the season when Wimbledon had drawn at home and lost narrowly away to suggest that was really going to happen for people who are actually paying attention. So even that, which is one of the greatest underdog stories, I mean, we're not talking about. I don't think we should have to be talking about a team with ultimate means and a team with lesser means that's kind of halfway down and not quite as heralded. So the underdog bit of it, it's not really, I guess what I'm saying with Liverpool and Wimbledon and that comparison is not really always about what you actually have, because Wimbledon had a lot of good players in that team who went on to have good careers and did well elsewhere as well. It's about the perception, and the FA Cup is a little bit different. Now, of course, as we say, the FA Cup has changed, but the FA Cup is on terrestrial TV showpiece that kind of like the World Cup. A lot of people who aren't massively into football and don't watch football to the extent that us and most of our listeners do watch every week. So I think you have to build that in when you're talking about what it means as an underdog story as well. Because say if we're looking at 10 people who are going to watch this FA Cup final today, say maybe 3 of them will be really obsessed with football and the other 7 are fully expecting a Manchester City win and don't have an understanding of the nuance of quite how good Crystal Palace are.
Yeah, so I think the framing of the question, is it one of the greatest underdog stories? That means that we then kind of play that down a little bit. Whereas if the question, sorry, Christopher, it sounds like I'm being very critical. Thank you so much for sending us the question, by the way.
No, get fucked, Christopher.
Yeah, true enough. Get back on X, where all the good people are, because he was on Blue Sky. Yeah. I think the frame of the question is, how big an achievement would this be? For Palace, it's just this is for Palace fans. This is almost sort of immortality for the side. You saw what happened.
Well, it is immortality because they never won a trophy.
Exactly.
Before.
You saw what happened this season with the League Cup and Newcastle. You saw those celebrations.
They are the underdog.
Completely.
They are the underdog.
So I think if I was to frame it in terms of greatest achievements for clubs, it's got to be right up there because the big teams have dominated the cups in the 21st century, before that as well, but particularly this century.
Oh, yeah, particularly.
And for a side to nudge in there, because you mentioned a few of the non-fancy ones. Well, Portsmouth, they'd had a lot of spending, though, but still it's huge.
Wigan, Cardiff in the final.
Yeah. So it shouldn't really count. Wigan, of course, is the one. But even when you mentioned Leicester, Leicester, I mean, they won the Premier League. What did they finish 5th, I think, that season or something? They were a European club at that point. So I think this would be an enormous achievement. Of course,
Portsmouth finished 8th the season they won the FA Cup.
Right. So
in the Premier League.
But Palace, I think this is. To try and give Palace a bit more of romance in there, I think this is huge for the neutrals. Every single neutral will be wanting Palace to win.
Totally, and it'd be huge for modern football. Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
to have a different team win the FA Cup, to have a new winner at this point, and also Palace, when we're talking about modern phenomena, Palace are very much part of that. In that team, in having become that team that's never going down, but they're not qualifying for Europe either. They're in that sort of like Premier League netherworld that we've talked about before. So for them to actually A, win something and B, get into Europe would be like incredible. Yeah. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah. We're all agreed there.
It's not Denmark 92. It's not Greece in the Euros, but it's pretty good.
It could be Palace 25 though.
Could be.
Let's hope so. Then if you're listening to this after and you're a Man City fan, you've already won, then you're probably having a chuckle.
You've had your fun.
And the opposite of Crystal Palace fans.
You've had your fun.
So there we are. All right, let's have a quick break, and after that we'll answer more of your questions.
Yes, all right. Another question, this time from Brandon on Instagram. He says, after the serious injury sustained by Nottingham Forest's Taiwo Awoniyi, is it time to review the protocol on delaying the raising of the offside flag?
Ooh,
Yes.
interesting one.
Yeah.
Yes, it really is. And look, it's not the first time we've had it, of course. You had the injury to Ederson right at the beginning of the Newcastle-Manchester City game. And, of course, he was injured in that action. He tried to play on. It affected the game because Newcastle scored in the next action when he could barely walk as well. So something really has to be done about this. And
what can be done though? Because to me, the way I see it is, it's just a byproduct of VAR. I don't know what somebody.
Yeah,
It is a byproduct.
Yeah.
It is a byproduct of VAR.
it is a byproduct of VAR. But I think clearly with semi-automatic offside coming in as well, I guess that is still developing. So that's something that
Semi-automatic, it's not like a second thing.
Yeah, I understand that, but it's
Well, you also get into a position now with VAR or semi-automated offsides, actually, where apart from things like throw-ins and corners, where referees can lead on any. I mean, sometimes referees lead on them anyway. You don't really need assistant referees because if players,
I mean, that is the big question.
If
really,
players are
isn't
going to play through anyway, which is what we're implying here by the fact that VAR decides whether it's offside or not, then that's not going to stop this stuff happening.
No, this is it. It's a complete byproduct because you either say, all right, we trust the linesman for really obvious ones, or
that's how it has to change, really, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, with that, there are moments in games where you think we all know that's going to be offside, or a lot of people have got a strong suspicion that's offside, and the referee's assistant, affectionately referred to as a lino, is thinks, I know that's offside, but I've got to wait for that. But it's just in case that they get an absolutely shocker wrong, or they have a shocker rather than they get one wrong. And you kind of go, well, hang on a minute, we could have played on and scored there. But because this, which very, very seldom happens with regard to injury, then I don't think there is a solution for this specific thing.
I think it could easily happen more. And I think when there's no doubt with the offside, I think they just have to raise their flag. Because otherwise, as Luke says, what is the point of them being there anyway?
And if you raise their flag and it turns out on the replay it was onside, people just have to get on with it. People are going and then when you
that's what it's there for. But
when you do that, right, we have to roll this all the way back to the start of before VAR was implemented, because what effectively was being said over and over again, and was the main reason for VAR to be introduced in the first place, was the football authorities, fueled kind of a lot by the players and the managers and all the rest of it before this happened, was we are not happy with human error being a part of the officiating of the game, right? Therefore, we want to get rid of that on key match incidents, which is what referees call them, KMIs, right? The offshoot of that is that we're going to get occasionally situations that happen with Awoniyi, happen with Ederson, happen with Rui Patricio as well, I think, from memory at Wolves a few years ago too. So if you're being totally mischievous about it, and I understand it's not the time to be mischievous because Awoniyi's had a serious injury that I read a consultant surgeon say it was genuinely a life-threatening injury, like a ruptured intestine.
Oh, it's awful.
Is a serious thing. Yeah. And he said, the guy I read talking about it said that what's worked in Awoniyi's favour here is that he's a very fit athlete, and so therefore his chances of having a serious injury or even death are greatly limited because of his physical condition. But it's serious, right? Yeah. But if you're being mischievous about it, you say, well, there is an inherent risk in playing football. Yep. The problem is that it's seen by the football-watching public as being ultimately a quote-unquote pointless injury because the game shouldn't have been carried on.
That's right.
Now, I wonder what conversation we'd be having here if there was no offside element in this incident. Yeah. You would just be saying, fucking that's a bad one. But it can happen.
That's right.
Same way that, a Peter Cech with Stephen Hunt can happen, right?
That's right.
there is an inherent risk to playing competitive sport.
Yeah, if Lino did flag it late and there was an injury, but for crying out, you get your flag up straight away.
Yeah.
It will always be.
I think you're right to say, Marcus, or to imply that we've been painted into a corner, and this is an offshoot of VAR because for exactly the reason you're saying, if if the assistant referee puts this flag up now in the current modern iteration of the game, the players are coached now to carry on because they think, well, we're going to carry on because if we score, it could be overturned. Yeah. So we're not going to stop anyway. So in many ways, the genie's out of the bottle for as long as VAR's in there because that's how these decisions are officiated now. So you can forget all this. I mean, I respect Brandon's question. It's a great, interesting topic to talk about. Yeah. But in terms of reviewing the protocol and delaying and the raising of the offside flag, as far as I understand it, unless I'm missing something obvious, I mean, you can't without rowing back how VAR is implemented, and that's realistically not going to happen. So unfortunately, as sad as it is for Nottingham Forest fans and for Teo Amani himself and his family, this is now part of the game. Yeah,
and exactly. And we're talking about this because of a freak accident on the football pitch, which of course everyone is very sorry it happened, and we want to see Amani back.
But could have happened in training. Could have happened.
But you're not playing it down yet, as Luke says. Unfortunately, that is it, and we wanted to see him back on the football pitch, fit and healthy as soon as possible. Andy, you've got the next question.
Yes, from Ben on Blue Sky. Chelsea have missed 79 big chances this season, the second most of any team in the league. Which forward should they be looking at bringing in to sort out their goal-scoring issues?
It's a good question.
They won't go for the one they need, I think, is the obvious answer to that.
Well, let me do my answer, and you do the obvious answer after. How about that?
Okay,
that's what people come to expect from us, this dynamic, isn't it? I'll do a load of stuff that I think I've thought about, and you'll tell me why it's bollocks.
I suspect I'll go for the obvious answer.
And the listeners like it.
Go on in.
Didier Drogba.
There you go.
No, before I go on the candidates that I think are interesting,
yes,
it is worth pointing out that there is an element to this question and the answer to it that has to be mentioned, which is that Chelsea are under a lot of financial pressure and are currently under investigation for a transaction which involved them selling their women's football team to themselves for a massive amount of money, which is being reviewed.
Real Madrid-esque.
Funny that's being reviewed, isn't it?
And so if they
I'd love to give more of an opinion, but I'll wait.
But that's the only way they've been able to post the numbers they need to post to give themselves the movement to even buy a new striker. If that gets kibosh, then I don't know because in terms of I literally don't know because I haven't looked into it well enough and I'm not a football finance expert. I don't know what they're going to be able to do, right? So I think they sold their women's football team to themselves for £180 million.
What a deal!
Yeah, great
What a deal!
Yeah. Would be a record for a European women's football side. The only other one that's gone for more than that is Angel City, I think, which was making decent profit in the US every year. The Chelsea women's team runs at a loss.
Sell it to themselves. How do they negotiate that?
Oh, yeah, short negotiation.
It's funny because
do you want to buy the women's team, Todd? Yes, you can, Todd.
It's funny because John Textor has sold the very successful Olympic Lyonnais women's football team and the 18,000 capacity basketball stadium that's right next to the stadium, and they've still got no money.
Right, okay.
Well, sod them, Andy.
Yeah. So what I was going to say was, going to assume they can buy a striker.
Yes.
If they can, then it's obviously pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. To me, the obvious one is Gyökeres, right? Gyökeres would be the player that you'd want.
He wasn't the obvious one, I would say.
You say Liam Delap?
You carry on. I'll have my moment in a minute.
I think. But
Gyökeres is definitely one to be considered. Yeah.
I think Gyökeres or Delap. Let's let Andy tell me why that's bollocks, and then you can have your say.
Well, I think when we say which forward they should be looking at, I think we have to build in what is realistic. Gyökeres isn't realistic. They're not going to get him.
Why not? He's too expensive.
Because he'll go to Arsenal because Manchester United are so bad.
Right, but he doesn't favour Chelsea.
No, exactly.
Okay,
it's not on his radar. And
okay, fine.
Yeah, I think it would be a sensible one. Victor Osimhen's the obvious one.
It's correct. Yeah,
that's the obvious one.
I didn't. So first of all, the question is who should they be looking at bringing in? So
to sort out their goal scoring issues.
Isn't that ship sailed though?
No.
Why?
No, it hasn't.
Well, I just don't. I mean,
he's 26. Osimhen will score goals. End of. He will. That's it for me.
He's the proper number 9 that they don't have.
He
scored 35 goals this season at the time of recording. He scored a lot more goals
in Turkey.
Yeah, but he's done it in Serie A as well. Won Napoli, the league with Napoli. He's done it in the Champions League.
He scored a load of goals in a completely rubbish Napoli team last season.
He's the finished article to me.
He is.
He is the guy. We're all surprised he went on loan to Galatasaray.
And he's incredibly durable. And by the way, you get kicked to shit in Turkey.
Of course, yeah.
And he's totally ready for the Premier League. I can't think of a more Premier League striker out there.
Does he want to go? He wants to go there, does he?
He would come to the Premier League if he got the right offer.
He's 26. He's won the Golden Boot in Serie A. He's on for it in Turkey. He's won Serie A. He's going to win the Turkish Super League. Blah, 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 blah.
Double, yeah.
The goal scoring record he has for Nigeria as well. He's the real deal. The finished article. You're going to have to pay a few quid for him. Gyökeres.
I just thought they couldn't get him because they tried to get him before and he was too expensive.
Well, maybe. But if we're playing a bit of fantasy, if we're playing a bit of fantasy football here, but understand that there's realism.
Well, apparently we're not playing fantasy football because I can't have Gyökeres.
Well, you can have Gyökeres, but the thing is with Gyökeres is, I think Gyökeres will do well, and I know that he's played football in this country before, in the British Isles, but I would. He's had a great time at Sporting. But I think that Osimhen's sample size is more cashable.
Funnily enough, I think Gyökeres will do better in the Premier League than Osimhen would.
Okay, all right.
But that's a different discussion. I think when you were talking about, Chelsea couldn't go and get Osimhen because of the wages. I think,
and wasn't that Napoli holding out for a huge fee as well, weren't they?
Yeah, but like the buyout clause is 75 million euros this summer, so it's very doable. The fact is, if you want a great centre forward, you're going to have to pay great centre forward wages. But I don't think they're going to go there. They'll probably go the route of young and develop again.
So what about Liam Delap?
Liam Delap is one of the obvious ones.
I mean,
although not as cheap as it could be because he's already in the Premier League.
But he is. There's links with him and Manchester United being reported in the press. If Liam Delap can hear me at all, don't go there for crying out loud. Because I mean, it's just
Delap's got a clause though. Delap's got a low clause.
I think if I was Liam Delap, I would go to a more sort of solid kind of mid-table, ambitious Premier League side like Fulham. Do a couple of seasons there.
Oh, I like it.
And then you get
the Mitro makeover.
Indeed, it did. But I agree with you. Look, I think Liam Delap's going to get a move. There's no doubt about that. And I think he's going to be really good in the Premier League. But of course, if you are Chelsea, and if indeed Chelsea were to finish in Champions League positions, it's a cup competition that they would want to go deep in. And they will want to be challenging some way or another. And if they did get Osimhen or somebody like this, then why not have a tilt at the title next season?
I guess the question is, does a 26-year-old striker fit their model? And the answer is probably not.
But their model is to get himself in a huge amount of financial trouble and for not much return on it.
Well, could they sell the under-18s?
Yeah.
But what about Benjamin Šeško? Šeško.
Yeah, I've seen him linked, but I don't know enough about him. Andy left.
I feel he wouldn't get the goals that Gyökeres or certainly Osimhen.
No, he wouldn't, I don't think. I mean, he's been more prolific this season. But when you saw him come through initially at RB Salzburg, where he really caught the attention, it was clear, because obviously there was the Erling Haaland comparison in terms of stature, in terms of age, they're very physically comparable. It was always felt, and I always felt, that Šeško had a much better all-round game.
He's young,
Haaland,
he's a lot younger.
But was not going to score that volume of goals. So he's scored more and more regularly in all different types of goals since the season's gone on, and he could come to the Premier League and do very well. But I think going back to the heart of Ben's question, we're talking about Chelsea putting away chances that they're creating and aren't being put away at the moment. So you want that out-and-out number 9 who's just going to do that.
See, for me, therefore you got Gyökeres and I would have Osimhen above him. If you feed Osimhen, he will score. It's as simple as that.
My stated position is I would quite like to see Chelsea in quite a lot of financial jeopardy.
Right, okay.
And
okay.
I don't like the idea, getting off topic a little bit, but just to give a little bit extra context for the question asker, I don't like the idea, and I know this always happens, and I know they're by no means the only team to do it, as we clearly know, but this is a question about Chelsea, so I'm going to put it in Chelsea's context. I don't like that the first thing that owners of this type do when they have PSR or financial fair play or whatever you want to call it put in place is to think, how can we get around that?
Yeah.
How can we loophole that?
Do you think instead
they've got questions to answer, because I think if they go out and just start breaking the bank for more players, thinking, we'll just loophole it later.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just
they should be.
That makes a mockery of the whole
exactly.
thing.
So
exactly.
do you think instead of a Super League, we should be working on the construction of a Hanseatic Hell League, where we put all these naughty little bastards. So we could have Chelsea,
Maybe.
Manchester City, Barcelona.
Is that how?
All get in there.
It was a surprise when Osimhen went to Galatasaray. Is that they sold it to him? Do you want to come and join the Super League? What, the Super League? Is that happening? Is this the Super League?
Yeah,
I mean,
could be.
in a way.
But
in a way.
you also got
LIG.
it would be remiss not to mention that even under this Todd Bowley era, they've already broken the bank for two really highly rated strikers, and Nicholas Jackson and Christopher Kunku. And Kunku, between them, cost what, £100 million between them.
Yeah.
Try and get a tune out of them. That might be a chance. I know Ed Sheeran, injured Christopher Nkunku, but I mean, he has been back. Yeah, I mean, he scored a hat-trick against Barrow.
Yeah, but unfortunately,
in the EFL Cup.
He did. I mean, that's just top-flight football for you, isn't it? You spend absolute pots of money on certain players, and after a season or two, it's like, no, we want a shiny new toy. And that's why so many teams around Europe, so many leagues around Europe, just look at the Premier League and go, you just...
Exactly, but Marcus,
it's like a millionaire or billionaire's playground.
Totally is. It's totally right. A year ago or so, we were sitting in this studio, all of us, going, the way Chelsea are doing this doesn't look right.
There has to be end of the road somewhere.
It doesn't seem right.
I agree with you.
And so, you dance with the devil long enough, sooner or later he's going to follow you home.
Yeah.
And at some point, you wonder what's going to happen there. So I think there's bigger problems. Although I do like the frame of the question. They missed a lot of big chances. It's quite an interesting sliding doors moment looking at that stat, 79 big chances this season, because had that been different, had that been reduced by even half, what position would Chelsea be in the Premier League? It might be right up there, So it is clearly a gaping hole. I would argue the goalkeeper's a gaping hole as well. I'd argue for all the money they've spent, it's quite weird.
Well, they've got no one near elite quality.
They don't have a decent quality keeper or a decent quality striker, it seems. So what did Mikel Arteta say after Arsenal won out the Champions League?
Oh, no.
He said a lot of stuff. A lot of it was absolute fucking bollocks. But one thing he did say, that was genuinely the case, not the bit about everyone at PSG on the PSG bench that said Arsenal should have won. Don't believe that one. Right. But what I do believe is it's in both boxes. That's the difference.
That is the difference, yeah. You're absolutely right. Okay, let's have a quick break and a couple more questions after this. Got one from Dan on email. Dan says, which player coming to the end of their career are you most desperate to see make a switch to the Premier League this summer?
Mine would be Jan Sommer.
Oh, you love that man, and I know why.
I think he's a brilliant goalkeeper.
And a beautiful boy.
Lovely looking fella. That's not most of it. That's part of it, though.
It's weird to think he's coming to the end of his career, but I mean, I understand that, you probably would say he's in the twilight of his career.
He could, I suppose, replicate in a way what, say, Buffon's. I mean, he's not as good as Buffon, but he'd replicate what Buffon did, played another 4 or 5 years, maybe. He looks in great nick. I mean, he's about to play in the Champions League final.
Yeah, so, he's 36.
To me, the reason for it is, I think that he's a wonderful goalkeeper. Yeah. He's genuinely a brilliant goalkeeper.
Great that he had that game against Barcelona, because everybody, I think there may be one or two people who might have not thought of him as being.
But in this studio, we've been banging this drum for a long time.
You in particular.
His last couple of years are payment for everything he's done in his career. So since he's left Gladbach, winning a title at Bayern, then winning one at Inter, now getting to a Champions League.
It's what he deserves for the quality keepers. But I would the reason I'm saying this is because, look, he has been one of the standout goalkeepers of this era, and I don't think it's fair. And football is, isn't always fair, and it's fine. But I don't think it's necessarily that fair that he's never mentioned in these conversations. And I think the reason he's not mentioned in these conversations in this country is because the Premier League has been the definitive domestic league of this era. And he's not featured in it.
Which is why it was great he had the moment in the semi-final.
But I think if he does win the Champions League with Inter, having won the league title with them...
Oh, my goodness.
I just cannot see for the life of me. Andy will know I'm more forensic than me. I can't see for the life. We just had a conversation before the break about Chelsea needing a keeper. Like, why is no one looking at him? Back when he's at Mönchengladbach, they would have been able to get him for a decent fee. It wouldn't have been.
Bayern didn't pay that much for him.
Exactly. You're not breaking the bank to get him.
But look at the clubs he went to. He went to Bayern. Now he's at Inter. So it's not like he's knocking around mid-table.
Fine, but you know as well as I do, Marcus, there could have been personal reasons he went to Bayern, of course. I'm not denying that. But realistically, he was at Mönchengladbach for 10 years. At any point in those 10 years, unless there's something about him I don't know, where he's like somehow some kind of dyed in the wall since he was born a Mönchengladbach fan, Premier League are going to dangle a carrot, and that carrot's going to be very difficult to resist. And we've seen it happen with hundreds and hundreds of players before. The lure of the Premier League. If you're a goalkeeper, the lure of the Premier League should be bigger than it is for any other outfield player, because once you're in, you're in.
Of course.
And so it's just surprising to me that he's never, plied his trade in the definitive domestic league in
I mean, there
Europe.
could be off-field reasons for that, but I understand the point you're making.
We can't speculate on that stuff. I mean, there might be,
I don't think we will see him in the Premier League because he surely will learn the lessons of Andre Onana. You get to a Champions League final with Inter, don't go near.
That's Man United. That's a Man United problem, not a Premier League problem.
I'll tell you what, Man United are definitely going to offer him, aren't they, in the summer?
You could see
They
him, Andy.
absolutely are.
Don't
And
answer that, Andy.
if he went there,
It'd be terrible.
Then I would lose all respect for him.
Could you see him? I mean, I'm not saying this would happen, of course, but could you see him having 3 seasons at Chelsea being really good?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Even at
guess
this age.
it's funny when we look at Dan's question. I think this is an interesting question because this is something that would kind of sit better in the mid-90s. You know, a player coming to the end of their career and then coming to the Premier League.
Yeah, but I like that, the idea of
Zola
the
and Bergkamp. But the opposite to that, obviously, is Thiago Silva.
Yeah,
he's the
Zola and
exception.
Bergkamp, especially Bergkamp, had a lot of the tank left.
No, in the modern world, we're talking about, you know, the... Or Rudhullet, I suppose, would be another one.
Rudhullet would be better,
I think we're talking about the exception that proves the rule. And Thiago Silva was amazing value for Chelsea. With that in mind, and again, realistic is not necessarily part of the question.
Lionel Messi?
Robert Lewandowski
Nice one.
is the one. Now,
Riquelme? Does he still do a job? I'd love to see Riquelme come.
But I think with Lewandowski, even though he's like knocking 36, you think he's had his best season in absolutely years. The way he plays, he's not just someone who could put up with the physical side of the Premier League. He absolutely relishes it. He goes looking for fights with centre-halves. And because he's such a smooth finisher, people overlook that part of his game. He would be monstrously good in the Premier League, even now.
He's got a year left on his deal as well, I think.
And they are desperate to get rid of those wages.
Fine.
Yeah. I think a big Premier League, say if
just
Arsenal,
solved Chelsea's problems in both boxes already.
Say if like Chelsea or Arsenal took him for a year, I think that would be a great deal.
I'd love to see, and I'm going to name a club as well. He may be 39. He may be playing in Mexico for Monterrey. But I tell you what, he scored 4 in 8. Get Sergio Ramos in the Prem. Centre half for newly promoted Leeds United.
That'd be amazing.
Come on.
That'd be so good.
The team as well.
I'd love to see how slow he looked. Just be mad.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, he likes a bit of the noughties, and I don't mean the decade. I mean the you know, the dark arts, and I think he could get away with that a little bit more in the Premier League than he could with.
Do you think he could plug the gaps defensively for Manchester United while Harry Maguire goes up front?
I tell you, it would not shock me if he went to Man United.
I love it. Do you know what club I'd love to see him go to?
Go on.
After the amazing season they've had defensively, we're going to get him to Burnley.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it. A
I know you've been
bastard.
absolutely airtight.
Yeah.
But you're out, I'm afraid.
Yep.
Because Sergio Ramos, age 38, is coming in and he's captain.
He'd guarantee 5 goals in the season.
He'd guarantee a lot, mate.
Yeah.
He'd guarantee an awful lot. I'll tell you.
It would be great.
But there we go. We've gone for the greatest player in Swiss history, the greatest player in Polish history.
Player in Swiss history.
I'd say so. Wouldn't you?
He's up there.
Chap was out.
Shaqiri.
I mean, you have to mention Shaqiri.
Shaqiri's had an incredible season.
Xhaka's still playing.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's people in the past that we're missing.
Yeah, probably is. But yeah, this is about hot takes, mate.
It is about.
I'm going to get the YouTube views. That's saying stuff like that. Greatest player in Polish history?
I think we're going to.
It's Lewandowski.
Yeah,
not Gregor Zlato, but we'll have.
It's not Boniek either. It's Lewandowski.
All right, okay, fair.
And Sergio Ramos. There you go.
You've mugged him off there.
I think if you can dish it out, Sergio, you can take it.
He's won the lot.
But I cannot get on board with the idea that Sergio Ramos is going to complain that someone else has mugged him off. I think he's done his fair share of it.
He's more decorated than those.
He's a fantastic player. He's obviously in the conversation for the greatest ever Spanish defenders, for sure.
That beard as well.
And going back to Thiago Silva, I actually think, I mean, this is probably not even, I'm setting this up to be an outrageous thing to say. I don't think it is. Thiago Silva is one of the greatest defenders to ever played a game.
Yeah, you have to.
No question.
Yeah, and at his best, he was untouchably good. Anyway.
And he wasn't involved in the 7-1 loss to Germany as well.
Well, he was
not directly.
Because he got suspended.
Well,
And so if he had played, it probably would have only been about 5. 5-2. I'll give you 5-2, but he might have popped up with one.
No, I want 4-2.
4-2, okay. They lost 4-2 at home to Germany.
I'm not budging on 4-2.
Okay, fine.
I love the idea that he wouldn't have been part of that emotional meltdown.
Yeah, I've got the final question here, which is from Will on Instagram. It says, what would the score in the 2014 semi-final between Germany and Brazil have been
Already answered
had Thiago Silva played? I'm saying 5 4-1. You're saying 4-2.
4-2,
No,
okay.
Will from Instagram has said, after Arne Slot and Harry Kane were spotted partying in Ibiza, separately I may add, which footballers would you most like to go to a Wayne Lineker beach party with? Now, before you get your guys' answers, I just thought to put myself on the record here as to say, if I never went to Wayne Lineker's Ocean Beach Club Ibiza in my life,
Bite your
or
hand
even
off.
1,000 lifetimes after this one,
Yeah.
if we agree or believe in the Buddhist idea of reincarnation, it will be too soon.
Right.
So I'm very, very unlikely to be within the same postcode of it anyway.
Yeah.
I feel the same. I'd do a Mark Morrison and send an imposter.
But if I
Sean
had
Derry
to-
could go for me.
But if I had, that'd work.
Yeah.
But if I
I like that.
absolutely had to go,
Yep.
I would go with Matt Letizia. And we both had a little pair of Speedos on.
Like, in for a penny, in for
And
a
hopefully,
pound.
in that kind of knee-deep pool
Yeah.
they seem to have, where everyone has cocktails in,
Yep.
I would, I'd fight him in it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, because I was tempted to go, I'll go with like Jack Grealish, he'll know the ropes and all that kind of stuff. And I think, no, because then it'd be off. And I'd be like, I would want somebody who I would think is not going to get involved, like definitely not going to get involved, is going to look around and go, what on earth's going on? So I'd probably choose Gary Neville. Because you think about Neville, he'd analyse it, what's going on, he'd point out everything that's wrong, and I'd be like, yeah, and I could be the host and go, but Gary, like, what do you think of those scantily clad people over there? And talk me through Wayne Lineker's movements towards them.
I think 15 minutes with Gary Neville would be way too much. I mean,
In that context, my goodness, you'd need an ally, and then we would sit down and talk about the 90s.
I've never met Gary. I see where you're going there. I've never met Gary Neville. I get the feeling he might be tedious.
You see, this may seem like an obvious answer. I would go.
You can't choose Fizzer.
I would go for Jamie Vardy simply
Oh,
because
Andy.
A,
Nice.
he would drink my share,
Yeah.
and B, he would overthrow Wayne Lineker.
True. Could be. I'm
So,
the captain
okay,
now
all
type
right,
situation.
I'm listening, Andy. I'm
I
listening.
think that would completely change the game.
Andy Brassel and Jamie Vardy is an odd couple.
It is very odd couple.
I mean, just picturing that is very, very odd.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me for the weekend. You're going to be going to Sporting to replace Gyökeres now.
No, after about an hour, Andy would insist on speaking only in French, so he'd have to speak to Vardy.
And Vardy would go, oh, French. Wouldn't he? You couldn't choose Fizzer, though. He'd probably not make it. He'd probably down on the beach relieving himself.
Speaking of, just walk around the whole place with a tent pole. You can't believe anything online anyway these days. Because I came into this question thinking that I was going to mention something that Jack Grealish apparently had done online.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of chirpsing someone quite famous on
Chirpsing.
Instagram. But I then realised just before we came in that it was debunked and it was actually a doctored screenshot and he didn't do that at all. So
off
I
with
would
the
have
case.
been besmirching his fairly mediocre name.
Indeed. Thanks for listening to the Football Ramble Mailbag, part of the Acast Creator Network. I'll be back on Monday with Pete and Vish to react to the FA Cup final.
Oh, you lucky bastards.
Yeah, you are welcome anytime.
No, I'm not going to do it.
Okay, please do send us your responses, opinions and questions for next week's mailbag and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a lovely time. Hope to see you at Cadogan Hall tonight. Laura Love.